Hey there guys, the Network Berg here, hope you're doing well. So, in this video we will be covering how to create WireGuard side-to-side VPNs, but it'll also be a little bit of a mix match with Road Warrior configurations as well. So I'm hoping that I can treat this as my last WireGuard video. I'm going to call this my ultimate VPN guide when it comes to WireGuard, because I want this to be the video that you use to reference whenever you're setting up WireGuard and just understanding some of the quirks that there are when using a MikroTik with WireGuard. So let's get into the video. Now, before we get digging into this lab that looks quite interesting behind me, let's just get into some of the theory of WireGuard. So I'm just going to navigate onto another tab here, go to wireguard.com. And I always put this link in the description or comment of my videos, but a lot of people seem to also ignore it. So I highly advise, please go to the white paper and read through this. It explains exactly how WireGuard functions, how it works, and how the implementation is. And what I like is there's a little stat here. Let me just scroll down here where you can see the performance. And this is based off of performance versus OpenVPN, IKE v1 and 2, and WireGuard. And as you can see, WireGuard's throughput and response time is just outright insane. It's crazy fast and it's crazy big. So it's a pretty good VPN protocol. So this is why it's like so much better to use WireGuard as opposed to OpenVPN, because it's going to give you so much more. And it's just also so much easier to configure. WireGuard's literally just setting up an interface, configuring your peer. And with MikroTik, there's a few extra little weird things you need to do, but overall, it's really easy to set up, way easier than IPsec in my opinion. But all of the information regarding WireGuard is on here. Please read this if you want to get into all of the hows it works. But I'm going to show you guys what I know is typically the issue that breaks a lot of people when they try and configure WireGuard and they want to understand how site-to-site specifically works, because and this comes down to routing as well as this allowed source or allowed IPs across your peer. Now, whenever we think about allowed IPs, I actually want you to think of them as the destinations or prefixes that you would like to get to. So when you configure that in your peer in WireGuard and you set allowed IPs, you are in essence saying the stuff that you want to get to that's on the other side of the tunnel. So remember that when we actually do the setup now, because it's going to make a lot of sense when we configure this on MikroTik. But that's typically what confuses people, that gets them. There's other things like firewall rules for your MikroTiks that can also cause issues. Now, I typically don't use any of the base MikroTik firewall rules. I have my own set of scripts that I usually import that is for my own use. Or if you're using a blank router like I'm using in this example, then there's no firewall rule, so you won't run into any potential issues of ports being blocked. But if you are using the default MikroTik firewall, then the default listening port when you configure WireGuard via Winbox does get blocked. So you need to actually implement the input filter chain to allow that traffic. And I'll show you guys how to add those input filter chains as well, but just stuff to take note of. It's nitty-gritty stuff that varies from person to person. This is why I sometimes find somebody says, great example, it works perfect, and another person will tell me, this is terrible, it doesn't work at all, whereas they might have been using the default settings or an input rule was actually blocking them from accessing or working with WireGuard. So just some stuff to take note of. Let's quickly just go over this topology as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to have three sites, site A, B, and C. Each site has a LAN subnet sitting behind the router. All three routers are MikroTik devices, and we're going to act as if we don't know what the site B and C IP addresses are. They might be coming in over NAT connections, and they'll be connecting to a WireGuard server in this instance to form a tunnel to connect and get to subnets. Now, the nice thing about WireGuard is you don't just need to connect to a server. You can form tunnels to each WireGuard client, let's say, to create almost a meshed network. That is actually why WireGuard is so cool as well. But we'll set this up in the basic sense that people is used to, where we'll have a server like a hub and spoke, a central point that people connect to, which will be the site A MikroTik. Now, Another thing that I just want to stress when it comes to configuring WireGuard on MikroTik, another quirk is, whereas if you do it on a client or another vendor, then a lot of the stuff might automatically get added, like the routing. On MikroTik, you need to statically add any routes for remote subnets that you're trying to reach. So that doesn't automatically get added. And this is also why I assign for MikroTik specifically, I'll assign /24 addresses to my WireGuard interfaces. However, when I come to the allowed addresses on the peer configuration, I'll just be allowing over /32 addresses. You'll see when we actually do the setup. So let's get into the setup. Let's open up Winbox. So I'll go into my terminal and let me just close this window. Actually, let's close all these windows. Let me get onto Winbox. Winbox. I heard they're also making a new Winbox for Mac and Linux, hopefully, so that it's native to the operating system, which is quite nice. But anyways, let's connect. I will first just connect onto the site A MikroTik. I'm going to connect through Romon on site A, and this will be our little server. So I'm just going to zoom in so you guys can clearly see what I'm doing. And I'm going to go into my WireGuard. And first thing that's always going to be a thing that you need to do is click on the plus. Then we got our WireGuard interface. So let's give it the name. I'll just call this WG-MikroTik-A. And listening port, by default, it's 13231. And then I can just click on apply. It will generate a private and public key for me. I don't need to add anything here. I just need to take note of the public key as I'm going to use it on my peers configuration later on. Next step, I'm going to assign an IP address to the WireGuard interface. So I'll go into my IP address. And this will be, think of this as the IPs that the WireGuard will use to communicate with each other, any client that's participating with WireGuard, and also to route traffic with. So I'm going to use 192.168.32.1/24. I'll bind that to my WireGuard interface. I'll click on OK. And now that is done. Now my next step is I actually need to create a peer. So I'm going to go into the peers tab. I'm going to click on the plus. And I need to set my interface, which will always be the first interface that I have created. But if you have multiple WireGuard interfaces, select the right one that people are connecting to. Now we need to specify our public key. So obviously I need to have a WireGuard interface on a second MikroTik. So let's quickly get that going. I'll set up a new Winbox window. I'll connect onto Romon again and then get onto site B. And then inside B, just very quickly, we create a WireGuard interface, call it WG-MikroTik-B. And I will hit apply. I'm just going to copy this public key quickly. And then I'm going to go back to the site A MikroTik, paste the public key, and that is it. Now, I'm not going to specify an endpoint and endpoint port because I'm working off of the assumption that those connections are coming from a carrier grade NAT or a NATed connection or an IP that I'm not aware of. So leave it blank, but we need to set our allowed addresses. And again, I'm going to stress the allowed address is the stuff that lives on the other end of the tunnel, the things that you want to get to. So in my case, I want to be able to get to 192.168.32.2/32 because that is the WireGuard IP of MikroTik 2 or site B. I also want to get to 172.16.20.0/24 because that is site B's LAN subnet that I want to access. And I'm also going to set a persistent keep alive. Now, what is a persistent keep alive? This is basically just an empty packet that will be sent across the tunnel in whatever interval you set here, just to keep the tunnel alive. Because if no traffic actually gets sent over the tunnel, very similar to IPsec, the tunnel might just shut down because it's like, okay, nothing's happening. So let's set a persistent keep alive. I'll set that to 25 seconds. That's pretty much baseline, but you can tweak that as you need to. Maybe you want less packets, so you could make it like 10 minutes, but 25 seconds is a good baseline. A nice thing that another viewer suggested is also set a comment, because if you set the comment, this you can act as if it's the name for the peer. So here I can call this site B. So now I know that this peer will connect to site B. If I click on apply, we can see there site B is having these peer details. If you leave that blank and you suddenly have 10 or 100 WireGuard peers, you're going to get pretty lost in knowing which peer is which. I can almost guarantee that. All right, now we are done with the site A configuration. I'm going to head into the site B MikroTik. And first thing I want to do is just assign an IP to its WireGuard tunnel interface. And that is going to be 192.168.32.2/24. And that is WG-MikroTik-B. Now, in a previous video, I said I make the clients usually /32s, and I usually do if it is a WireGuard client like a Windows or Linux or MacBook or something that's connecting. But if it's MikroTiks, I'm making this a /24 so that if I look at my routes, the whole /24 subnet will be routed over the WireGuard interface. That is the main reason I do that. But like I stressed earlier, I will still set the allowed addresses in the peer configuration to /32s. So let me go into the peer and configure that. Let's get the public key from site A quickly. So I'm just copying the public key of site A, and then I'm going to place that in the site B MikroTik's configuration. And then I'm going to set my endpoint here because I need something to initiate the traffic. If neither end has an endpoint specified, then who's gonna start talking? You know, these devices are quite shy, and one of them needs to be an initiator. Somebody needs to come in and start the conversation. So MikroTik site B will be the one that will initiate that conversation. So it will connect to an endpoint, and that will be a WAN IP or the address of MikroTik 2 or site A, apologies. And the endpoint port was 13231. Allowed address, now this is where I need to say the stuff that I want to get to, what networks lives at site A that I want to reach. And that will be 192.168.32.1/32, which is the WireGuard tunnel IP of MikroTik 1 or site A. And I also want to get to 172.16.10.0/24 because that is the LAN subnet that lives behind MikroTik 1 or site A. I'll set the persistent keep alive as well. And let's just set a comment, even though it will only be one peer. It's good practice to just do that. Let's hit apply. And there we go. Tunnel is set. I can already see some traffic traversing the tunnel. We can see there is a handshake. So this is really good. And I'd like to see, does this actually work? So I'll go into Eve. And I've got some virtual PCs here. So let's just add DHCP. This is now PCA for site A. And from PCA, which is having the IP of 172.16.10.254, I want to see, can I ping MikroTik 2 or site B's LAN address 172.16.20.1? Can I ping that? It is timing out. Any idea why it might be timing out? Well, I said earlier in the video, MikroTik has some weird quirks, and we haven't actually specified any static routing yet. So let's add those static routes. So what I'm going to do is on site A, I need to add a route to say, how am I going to get to the LAN subnet of site B's or the second MikroTik's LAN? So that was 172.16.20.0/24. And my gateway I'm going to use is the WireGuard interface. So that will be WG-MikroTik-A. I'll hit apply. Now you'll see I have this new static route that's routing 172.16.20.0/24 over the WireGuard tunnel. Let's do the same on the site B MikroTik. So I'll add a route to say, if I want to get to the LAN subnet of site A's MikroTik, I will go over the WireGuard interface. So that is WG-MikroTik-B. I'll hit apply. Hooray, so the routing is in place now. So we've set the peers, we've set the routing, everything should be fine. Let's just try and reinitiate that traffic. So I'll try and ping 172.16.20.1. And it is still timing out. Now, I've seen this happen on MikroTik, and to get this working, all that we are going to do is actually just re-auth the peer. So I'm just going to disable the peer, re-enable the peer. And once that is done, I'll go back to the VPC and I'll try and ping again. and now the ping works. So just something to take notes of. It's again one of those weird quirky things. You could try and add the static route first and then bring up the tunnel, but just be aware of that. This might be something that catches you off guard as well, because maybe you do the setup and you're like, hey, it still doesn't work, it's just timing out. Just refresh the tunnel, and that could potentially solve the issues you're having. Before I get onto the Site C MikroTik, I just want to stress, please make sure that you have the relevant firewall policies in place, because if you don't, you're going to run into some issues. Now, rules that I recommend you have is, firstly, some filter rules to allow traffic between the subnets. So what I mean by that is any traffic that's going to be forwarded across the tunnel, allow that. So I would say 172.16.0 or 10.0/24, which is my LAN subnet, going to 172.16.20.0/24, which is Site B subnet. I'm going to say accept that. That's all I'm going to do. And I'll copy the same rule, and I'll just do the uno and reverse this. And there I copy that one, but there we go. So now we have two forward chains to say allow traffic between the LAN subnets. And if you had any firewall policies already in place, just make sure you push these two rules at the very top so that they get referenced first. And then this should in essence allow access if there is other filter rules in place already. Now, another filter rule that is recommended that you have is you click on the plus, you do an input chain, you specify the protocol as UDP, you specify the port as 13231, but this could be whatever the listening port is of WireGuard. So in our case, it's 13231, but that's what you would add. But I'm on the wrong MikroTik now. You should be doing this on the server. So let me just go to the server quickly, add it there. And the reason for this is the default MikroTik firewall is blocking 13231 on UDP. So you need to just allow this if you use it. I typically don't, so this is why I don't run into these issues. 13231, and you just need to accept it. So this is a very basic firewall rule, just to make sure that any incoming traffic on port 13231 that wants to connect will be able to connect to your MikroTik. All right, you can also just set the in interface to your WAN interface, just to add a little bit more security there. And yeah, that should be a good rule, just to allow the incoming traffic so that WireGuard can be formed. Something else I want to point out is it might also fail because of your service provider. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say you've got an ISP and they're giving you internet access, obviously. However, on their router, they might be blocking the UDP port that WireGuard wants to use to listen on. Then you'd have to ask your ISP to also just allow that type of traffic. This is why it's such a weird thing for me to recommend to everybody everywhere, because everything is so different when it comes to networking and the internet. There's so many possibilities why your tunnel might not be working that you'd have to troubleshoot it, and you'd have to maybe get a consultant to check it out for you as well. But I'm just showing you how to do a typical site-to-site setup, which should in theory work with most ISPs or most setups, but you never know. Like it's impossible for me to know everybody's setups. All right, so let's do the Site C now. So Site C, we're going to be doing through the command line just to show you how quick and easy it is. And I'm just going to explain, it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to treat Site C as a road warrior. Think of this as an LTAP device we've got carrying around with us, and then we just set this up, connect our laptop to it, and boom, we're on the WireGuard network, and we can get to all of the resources we need to and browse the internet securely. Now, what this means is I'm just going to set the allowed addresses to all, and I'm going to route all internet traffic over the WireGuard tunnel. Now, for this to work, I'm going to actually just look at my IP routes, and we can see I don't have any routing configured at the moment. Maybe since it's an LTAP, you might have your default route guard over your LT interface or something. But what I'd recommend is set up a default route, or not a default route, a static route to the WireGuard's public address that you're going to be forming the connection to, so that endpoint address. And for me, this will be 164.0.2/32. And then my gateway will obviously be now my actual internet, the way that I connect. It could be your WLAN as well, whatever you're actually getting onto the internet with. So 192.168.149.152. So let's just see, can I ping my WireGuard server. And I can. So this should mean I should be able to create that tunnel. So let's continue with the actual setup. First bit is interface WireGuard. We're going to add a new WireGuard interface. I'll just give this the name of WG-MikroTik-C. I'll hit enter. And then I'm going to print this new interface. And here we can see what the public key is. And I want you to note also the listen port is completely random. So if you do the setup from the command line, just take note of that, especially if you do a server side of thing, because then the listen port could be something different than 132.3.1. And then you just have to add whatever that port is to your firewall rules. All right, but let's just copy this public key. And then I will navigate to my site A MikroTik. I'll create a new peer. I'll paste the public key in here for site C. I won't specify an endpoint address or port. I will specify the allowed addresses because remember this is the prefixes that lives on the other side of the tunnel, which was 192.168. It will be 32.3/32. And it will also be 172.16.30.0/24. I'll also set a persistent keep alive of 25 seconds. And I'll set the comment as site C. I'll apply this. And now that has been set up. Now let's just do the setup on site C. One more thing, sorry. Let's just pre-add this route out to the LAN subnet for site C. So 172.16.30.0/24. Gateway will be WG-MikroTik-A. Apply. And done. Now let's continue. Jump back to the terminal. First things first, let's add an IP address of 192.168.32.3/24. I'll add that to my WireGuard interface. Then we're going to add the actual WireGuard peer. So interface, WireGuard, peers, add. I'm going to set a persistent keep alive, will be 25 seconds. I'll be setting my endpoint address as 164.0.2. I'll be setting my endpoint port as 132.3.1. I'll be setting my interface as the WG-MikroTik-C. I'll be setting my allowed address as 192.168.32.1/32, which is the WireGuard tunnel IP of MikroTik 1 or site A. And I'll also just add 172.16. Actually, sorry, since I said this is going to be a road warrior, let's make it 0.0.0.0. We're just going to push everything over the tunnel. And I just need the public key of site A, site A's interface. So let's just copy this. And let's just paste that in quote marks. I'll hit enter. And that's it. This is the typical setup. If I do an IP route print, what I'm going to do is I'm going to route all traffic now over the WireGuard tunnel. So I'm going to do an IP route add. Destination is 0.0.0.0/0. And my gateway will be the WG-MikroTik-C. I'll hit enter. And what I'd like to do now is just go back to site A. I just want to see the peers. Do I have any TX and RX? I do have some TX and RX here. From site A, I'd like to see, can I ping 172.168.172.16.30.1 from 172.16.10.1? So I can ping across the tunnel, which is actually very good news for us. Can I ping 192.168.32.3, which is the WireGuard tunnel IP for site B or site C, apologies. And I can. Let's check from the command line for site C. Can I ping 8888? And I can ping out to Google or Google's DNS server. And this is through the WireGuard tunnel now. All right, so we've got our tunnels working from site C and site B to site A, which is fantastic. However, one question remains that a lot of people tend to ask me is, how do we get the two remote sites to communicate with each other, especially if they're running on NATed connections like this? So in this way, we will also route the traffic through site A, but we need some additional configuration for the remote sites to be able to talk to each other. Namely, we will need to update the allowed addresses where applicable. So for site C, it's not applicable since we're just routing all traffic out over the Wireguard tunnel. But if we didn't, then we'd have to also just stipulate in that configuration what additional subnets we'd like to get to. So remember, allowed addresses is the stuff that you want to get to, the stuff that you're allowing to go over the tunnel and come back in over the tunnel. So I'm going to do this configuration on the MikroTik router site B. I'm actually going to go into my peers in Wireguard. And then I'm just going to firstly click on this down arrow, and then I'm going to add the LAN subnet of site C in here. And additionally, I'm also going to need to add a route for the traffic to get over the Wireguard interface. So I'm going to say, if I want to get to 172.16.30.0/24, then my gateway can be WG-MikroTik-B. I'll hit apply. And now I am allowing traffic to the additional subnet of site C. I don't need to do anything on the peers of the site A MikroTik because site A already knows how to get to all of these subnets and access them. So let's do a quick test. So what I might do is, let me just close this window and reopen it for the VPC at site C. I'll do a IPDHCP. Let's just see what IP I obtain. I get the IP address of 172.16.30.254. So let's see, can I ping 172.16.20.1? Hooray, I can ping 20.1. And that is the remote address of the LAN for site B. Can I ping 10.1? Yes, I can. And similarly, I'll just log on to the site B MikroTik, and I'll also just test from its terminal. So I'll do a ping 172.16.30.1, and I'll source from my own LAN range 172.16.20.1, and I can ping across. And all I did was add additional config on this site B MikroTik. And like I said, if I did specify specific subnets on the site C MikroTik, then I'd also just add the site B subnet in that allowed address, and it would work the same way. The principle is exactly the same. And if you see it doesn't work, then I also just want to stress, check the firewall rules again, and also just maybe disable, re-enable your peers and see if that maybe and hopefully fixes your issue. But this covers, I hope, all the basic scenarios that I think that you might get when you configure Wireguard. It's been a trip, but I'm really hoping this is the last video I make regarding Wireguard. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'd like to thank my YouTube and Patreon members for supporting the channel, as well as everybody that just watches the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day. Bye.